Hello there, this is the Misanthropic Lord, and welcome to another Misanthropic Musing. Today I'm looking at That Dragon Cancer. Even with the short time that this game has been on Steam, it was released last Tuesday, this game has had a reputation for being a heart-rending look at a child's battle with cancer, and the way that his family chooses to cope with it. To even ask the question whether this game is worth playing feels insulting. After the effort and true terrible emotion that has been put into this experience, it feels slimy to even try and rate this game with a review, especially since it's honestly barely a game. It's more an attempt at an art style, a carefully crafted visual representation of a tragic period in the Green's family life story, which would cause all but the most emotionally sturdiest people to despair. This is a true story. The events and the writings and even the voices are supplied by the family. In many instances, there are sound clips that come from old home movies, voice recordings, and transcripts from real notes and diary entries from the start to the end of Joel Green's sickness.
Almost 5, right?
This is why it feels low to even attempt to review this, to give a grade to something like this.
Wawa. In cups and bathtubs, in the warm wet tongues and the cool fur of Das.
It's not so much a game, but a stylized, candid look into a grief-filled and emotionally vulnerable time in the family's life. Yet I found myself growing while playing the game. While the first half of the game was masterful in drawing you into a beautiful, cel-shaded world, where although there's the ever-present reality of despair, it is trumped by the sense of hope, and focusing on the happiness of the present. Although the models are low polygon, there's a real feeling of emotional distress and uncertainty within the scenes bounded by time lapses. It makes the game feel like you're flipping through a graphic novel. There is genuine heartache for the husband and wife. They're struggling to raise a child with special needs at the beginning of the story, and life gives them another gut punch in ensuing battle with Joel's cancer diagnosis. There are scenes that balance on emotional distress and hope, of hospital walls filled with the artwork and pictures of those I assume have gone through the emotional destruction of having a loved one fight the disease. You can view them at your leisure, taking as much time or as little as you want to view the picture. They are in beautiful and vibrant colors, harking back to happier, more hopeful times, against the cool, convalescent hues of the hospital background. This is when the experience shines brightest and feels most poignant. There's a moment I want to share where I, in my obvious burly manliness, started to blubber like an especially large walrus. You start in an empty hospital room with cards strewn about like dominoes waiting to be toppled over. I open one up and I just see a name and 2 dates. Then I look and see a string of cards. I walk out and I see desks filled with them, cards vividly and hopefully colored. They are strung across the walls like Christmas lights and shining as vibrantly. Each one represented a different story of loss and grief and maybe even a few kernels of hope. It was powerful and moving, and yet this quiet sense of collective humanism would bizarrely change gears in the second half of the game, which starts to figuratively and literally go adrift. Before I get too much into the second half, though, I want to share why the first half of the experience is so effective. It's about the struggle of the sickness and the day-to-day dealings of hospital life, and is generally about the overall feeling of coping with looming catastrophic loss, but with an inspirational spark of keeping on regardless of the odds. This general feel switches in the second half to focus on the spiritual tumult that the couple goes through when they learn that treatment plans for Joel are not going well.
Peace.
On one hand, I know that this game is a true story, and as such there's a natural slathering of pathos that is infused with every bite of this game. But honestly, the second part struck me as an oddly uncomfortable collection of religious-themed Hallmark card blurbs.
Everyone does eventually, I suppose.
I just really believe he'll be healed.
There are heavy themes of hope, grace, and deliverance, culminating in an odd collection of what I can only describe as a Christian-themed LSD trip. Nearing the end of the game, everything that I had naturally felt had changed into just getting through it. Just getting to the end of the game before I completely lost the strong feelings I had for the game. It was so weird being so heavily affected by the well-done scenes and letting the emotions come naturally from the environment, to having the game create scenes that essentially told me how I was supposed to feel.
Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him.
I will not let you go unless you bless him.
Instead of quiet repose, loud and weirdly triumphant glory given to God, even as their son is slowly dying from cancer. It doesn't feel like a natural setup. Instead, the narrative becomes needlessly muddled, and the emotions, though genuine, still invoke an odd sense of artificiality. It's like seeing a computer-generated character that isn't quite human, but for your feelings. I guess the best way to describe it is, it's like watching that Sarah McLachlan commercial with all the animals, like the dogs and the meow meows. You know which one I'm talking about. I think that's it. I think it feels heavy-handed. It's pathos that greatly overdraws the power of Christian themes and spirituality. Even now while writing this, I'm having trouble figuring out how they want us to connect the dots. How they so expertly created the quiet message of despair with a faint glimmer of hope and love in the first half, juxtaposed in the second half with the narrator quoting full Bible stories and stylized images of churches and angels. It just left this odd sense of loss.
And I hope that in the Lord's next breath, He will whisper His love song to you, His beloved, and that you will know Him differently and more deeply.
I was so waiting for a story on how the family coped, and how they kept hope and belief that everything was okay. And to have that story distilled to, God'll do it, He solves everything, thank you, God, it just felt so unfulfilling. It actually made me appreciably annoyed that the big message I was supposed to take away was, hey, don't worry, God's got it. As if all the stories in the cards, every person behind the pictures and art in the hospital, even the staff helping the family out were just there as background characters to a divine plan that just takes people to a better place. It very nearly invalidates the grief of anyone else. Hey, why do you feel sad? They're just in a better place, right? Man, God is awesome. He solves everything. There's no need to feel bad about that whole disease thing, because God's got it. Hooray, buddy! I actually started to feel angry about it while playing, and up until the ridiculous last scene, I was fully intending on not recommending that dragon cancer. The screen flashes white and I feel good about finally playing the game. I don't have to record anymore. And the heartfelt words, "Thank you for playing," came up. With a picture of Joel Green, who up until this point was just a collection of polygons. Instead, I saw him for who he really was. A sweet little boy with a loving and caring family. More pictures came, and smiles and laughter and a real sense of peace. That is when I was struck by the real message. I finally connected the dots. This was just one of those many stories. This was the way that one family was able to make it through the pain and paralytic grief. In my callous cynicism, I was still valuing that dragon cancer on its merits as a game. But that's not what it was. This was a story of how a family coped with horrendous tragedy. A family that suffered and struggled for years, and now who have opened up an unknowingly painful time in their life to the true story of their little boy, his life, and what they had to believe to survive the pain and suffering. Who am I to denigrate that feeling of grace, wherever it comes from? Who am I, being familiar with loss and making the wrong choices to cope, to say that their way to survive was incorrect? In trying to figure out if this game was worth playing, I forgot an important lesson about art. I was confusing the art existing for art's sake, instead of recognizing the beauty in the truth. I cannot dismiss the truth of this family and their grief just because it wasn't my own. I could choose to have issues with the mechanics of the gameplay and the often surreal and confusing setups for the scenes. But it was unfair and simply unfeeling for me to not recommend going through this experience solely because I don't agree with the coping methods of the Green family. With that being said, I will say that Dragon Cancer is an experience that, while a little pricey for the 2 hours of experience you'll probably receive from it, is completely genuine, heartfelt, and humbling. I will give cautious recommendation for people who are less spiritually inclined, but if you are a Christian, or just receptive to the reality of one family's hardship, then Dragon Cancer will leave your tear ducts empty and your hearts full. Many thanks to the Green family for sharing their story. Your strength and honest storytelling is humbling and not unnoticed. And with that very dour version of the Misanthropic Musing, thank you for listening. If you like this, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, this is the Misanthropic Lord signing off.